Hey, it is noon. So in the interest of time and making sure we are able to cover everything that we want to share today, I think we should begin. So welcome everyone to the McMaster Midwifery Research Center 2023 Research Symposium. My name is Beth Marie Davis. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the scientific director of our research center. So although the MMRC Symposium is virtual, where I find myself today on this sunny and beautiful spring day, and where you are, is Indigenous land that has been inhabited from the beginning. I'm grateful to all of the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. I'm really thankful to be able to live, work, and play with my family on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. This land is also directly adjacent to the Haldimand Treaty Territory. I think when we offer a land acknowledgement, it's important to also be reflective and mindful of our actions and to go beyond offering these as just words. So as a settler here on Turtle Island, I am committed to actively reflecting on and fulfilling my treaty responsibilities, and I offer this land acknowledgement in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. This acknowledgement must also serve as a call to action for our collective commitment in our communities to bring justice to the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people, and to ensure that they have access to their fundamental rights of safety, security, and equal protection under the law. So thank you everyone who has joined us from Canada and even abroad. The MMRC was established in 2018 at McMaster University and is dedicated to excellence in midwifery research that informs policy, practice, and education and improves outcomes for pregnant and birthing families and their infants. It's our vision and our hope to be a center that promotes excellence in maternal child health and healthcare through the generation of evidence to optimize midwifery care. We are delighted to have you here for our symposium. This is our first day of a 5-day, very full lineup. We have different presenters and topics each day, so please make sure you check out the full program if you haven't already done so. We've got it on the next slide. Perfect. And you can use the same Zoom link that you used today. And even if you didn't register, just use that link and come on back and you can join us for as many days as you would like. So if you also want to check out the bios and other details about the program, head over to our website, which is mmrc.mcmaster.ca. All of the videos of our presentations will be publicly available after the symposium. You'll need to give us a little bit of time for the final polish and editing, but otherwise they all will be posted there. You can also see previous rounds and previous symposium presentations. So, if you've got some free time, you could just get sucked your website and see lots of really informative talks. Today we're in webinar mode for these presentations, and that means that for question and answers, we're going to ask that you use the Q&A box. We also have an additional link that's going to be available. We'll put it in the chat now. That will take you over to a Padlet, which is another place where you can comment and chat and just engage in some dialogue and like discussion board type features after the talks today. And that's because we will be a little bit limited in our time for question and answer. So if you want to keep the conversation going, we suggest that you head on over to that Padlet site. Today is a full day. We have a keynote speaker, Dr. Karyn Kaufman, and then we have a research showcase for one of our research scientists, Liz Darling, and then we're really pleased to have a student showcase for Erica Campbell presenting her PhD research. So I'll tell you more about all of those as we proceed through the program today. First, I am going to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Professor Karyn Kaufman. Her presentation is entitled From There to Where. Very intriguing title, Karyn. So Karyn, I can tell you a little bit about her, is a Professor Emerita from McMaster University. She obtained an undergraduate degree in nursing from University of Michigan, a master's degree in midwifery from New York Medical College, a doctorate in maternal and child health from the University of North Carolina, and an Honorary Doctor of Laws from the University of British Columbia. She was a full-time faculty member at McMaster from 1974 until 2007. She continues to be involved in advisory committees and research projects. And from 1986 to 1991, Karyn had a unique role where she was seconded to work part-time with the Ontario Ministry of Health to implement the legislative and policy framework of today's midwifery profession. So from the inception of regulation in 1993, and the Midwifery Education Program, she was the inaugural director of the Midwifery Education Program at McMaster and the assistant dean in the Faculty of Health Sciences, as well as being a practicing midwife in Hamilton. In 2010, she was inducted into McMaster's Community of Distinction, and in 2015, she received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Ontario Midwives. Karyn continues to consult with Canadian provinces and territories on midwifery education and midwifery practice. She's been part of international midwifery education projects in Pakistan and Haiti, and was contracted by the ICM to help develop methods for assessing and strengthening midwifery education programs. We've seen this as well in Canada, where she's been the leader of the development and initiation of the accreditation process for midwifery education programs. We are delighted to have you, Karyn. This is so special that you're here to launch our symposium. This is a year where we're recognizing 30 years of midwifery education in Ontario, and we couldn't think of anyone more perfect to set the stage for this at our symposium. And we're delighted to hear your reflections on these 30 years. So I will hand it over to you, Karyn.
Thank you so much, Beth, for that very nice introduction. And I want to thank all of the organizers of this symposium for this invitation to reflect on the 30 years since the Midwifery Education Program and the legal recognition of midwifery in Ontario. While this is specific in some ways to Ontario, I think there are generalities that will be relevant to midwives across the country, because I know that this forum is more than about Ontario. And in extending thanks, I also want to send those thanks to a colleague, Dr. Christina Madison, for her creative skills in crafting slides for me today. I have to say that after accepting this invite, I had several moments of anxiety or wondering about what would be of interest to a 2023 audience. It's not to recap certainly every moment of history, but with a deep breath and okay, carry on, some personal reflections on the past years and a few thoughts for looking ahead at the road that's in front of us. So I start by looking back, the there of 30 years ago, May 1993. From the perspective of the Midwifery Education Program, we were in the midst of recruiting faculty, launching an admissions process, and this was had to be rapidly put together, getting approval for a curriculum in 3 separate universities, each of which had its own committees and structure and process for how to get that approval, and having to be ready to offer the first term of courses in September of 1993. So in May, we were scrambling, and that's 30 years ago. And all of that happened before the legislation had even been proclaimed. And while it was in process, the actual proclamation didn't happen until January of 1994. So why such a hurry? Well, to back up even earlier than 30 years ago, the Ministries of Health and the Ministry of Colleges and Universities of the day, they had issued a call for proposals for establishing midwifery education. It was based on many recommendations that came from the task force on implementing midwifery. And also that task force received multiple submissions from interest groups, from institutions, from organizations who had a direct interest in how midwifery would be established. And many of those had to do with the type of education. This is a historical poster from that time, which reveals to you, in fact, how this was disseminated, what the lines of communication were in order for people to make their wishes known about what midwifery should look like when it was going to be legislated. There was also another committee that was put together to specifically recommend whether midwifery should best be situated in a college granting a diploma or a university where it would be a degree program. And I guess it's pretty obvious how that worked itself out. The call for proposals specified the necessary features of what the education program would look like. It was to have multiple sites that could service different geographic locations and both French and English-speaking populations, and offer distance learning. Please remember, this was 1992 when the call came out, long before anything like the internet or www.anything was known. Distance learning at that time meant being on a conference phone and using Canada Post, a far cry from what happens today. The McMaster-Ryerson collaboration was notified in December of 1992 of their successful application with a provision that students had to be enrolled by the fall of 1993. That was a public forum where this was announced. And I recall that at the time, someone came to me and said, how was this going to be possible? And rather laughingly, I quipped, well, 9-month gestations were familiar to midwives. Surely we could produce a new program in that time period. And we did, with an emphasis on that we. This was no solo activity, and it took time, talent, collaboration on a large scale to build this program. And true to the timeline, the first students did enroll in September of 1993. It's a tribute to the dedication and commitment of those initial faculty members and those very adventurous first students for hanging in there through a very formative time when the curriculum was really being built semester by semester. Graduates now owe many thanks, I think, to those who built the foundation, but have also managed many of the changes over the subsequent years, both some expected and some not expected. Of course, it's quite predictable that there would be an increase in enrollment, which there has been, leading to more midwives in the province and the country, more practices, and certainly more practices in more locations. What did change also was the length of the program. It started as a 3-calendar-year program, 9 consecutive terms with hardly a break. Changed to be a 4-year program, and some students would say, I think there's still probably not much of a break, but it was in response to evaluation and strong feedback about how difficult it was to maintain that momentum and to go to a 4-year program. An unexpected change, of course, was more recently the loss of one of the sites of the Ontario program, despite the very early commitment from government about having north-south and all of those conditions that I mentioned that were part of the early call for proposals. And of course, one of the major changes is the technological advances that facilitate communication from anywhere to everywhere, much as it's doing today. And while it would be wonderful to be able to see the audience, I know that they're spread widely, and so that's one of the advantages. And students can be spread widely and take advantage of those technological advances as well. and then more recently, the establishment of research centers and funded researchers, as well as having opportunity now for advanced education in midwifery, which will lead to larger numbers of masters and doctorally prepared professionals in the field. So these are large changes, but still took a fairly long period of time to establish, but the momentum has increased, and it's wonderful to see the things that have happened in the recent years. So along that early road, the midwifery profession spent time and energy creating the regulatory and practice framework that enabled self-regulation, autonomous practice, hospital privileges, and public funding. This slide kind of paints a bit of a picture of the curving road, things that weren't always straightforward, but the progress was forward. The accomplishments that were realized in many ways are the envy of many midwives around the world, and Canadian midwives are perhaps more fortunate than we realize. And I say some of that based on the work that I've been part of in recent years in a consultancy role with ICM, the International Confederation of Midwives. That work has reinforced my perspective on what I think about some of the things that we in Canada got right. Fundamentally, autonomy is at the basis of the education and practice. So that when the legislation about health professions in Ontario was being overhauled in the late 1980s and early 1990s, there were really extensive submissions about the reasons that midwifery needed to be an autonomous profession and not part of nursing or medicine. An outcome that was finally realized when the legislation was put in place. And autonomy is certainly the foundation for both education and practice. Midwives self-regulate, create practice models, and provide midwifery education. This seems so logical and entirely reasonable, but the reality is that it's not so in many other places. So I put autonomy as being central in this province and in this country as something that we got right. Some other aspects are about the education programs itself. And again, looking at some of the experience that I've had working with ICM, I've reviewed numerous curricula that are organized in modules where each segment is focused on a specific aspect of care, antenatal care, interpartum care, etc. The content and the clinical experience are limited to that component for a block of time. Normal and abnormal are taught. Students then move on to the next component. There's no opportunity to form ongoing relationships, to witness over time the experience of the pregnant individual and family. There's no continuity of care with a provider or a learner, no opportunity to form partnerships or to be invested in the client's experience. And yet research from more than a decade ago demonstrates that models of continuity of care make a difference. And we as midwives are witness to those differences, some small, some very profound. I think midwifery education that values student experience with clients over time is an aspect that we got right. In addition, I think the volume of clinical experience for students is another thing that we got right. While it's difficult at times and stressful, it's very important for autonomous practice that students be engaged in a large volume of doing, of having hands-on. It's coming at a time when there's a growing emphasis in some parts of the world, at least, on using high-tech simulation as a substitute for clinical practice. Because it's available, because it seems like an easy answer sometimes to the difficulties of engaging students in the real world. They get to practice skills. And simulation and high-tech simulation has a place. It does offer some advantages for learning and for assessment, but it can never replace the reality in all of its complexity. So I think the emphasis that the programs here have on the volume of clinical practice for students is still something that is important. And again, I would say, I think we got it right. The pedagogical approach of PBL, which arose, meaning problem-based learning, I would like to see it retitled person-based learning, I think is also a feature that has serviced well. It's not an easy way to teach. It's not an easy way to learn. And it's important to learn facts, which is what the stress is often upon, but it's also important to acquire the skills to critically analyze information, its origin, its applicability. But beyond that, the information exchange, being part of a group, reflecting on one's own abilities and knowledge-based, exchanging views, and negotiating with others are critical skills that will serve students well into their future. So the pedagogical approach is something to help prepare people for the complexities of the years ahead in actual practice. Another feature, not directly about midwifery education, is a question mark about whether we got it right. And there were issues at the outset about the scope of independent action for midwives. On the practice, for many reasons, there were sort of bumps in that path, which is why I put up a caution sign. A broad scope was unlikely, I think, at that point to be realized, and the focus was on ensuring that midwives could provide care through the childbearing cycle. So there were reasons why the scope of practice was as it was, but whether it should have been pressed differently, I think is debatable. But it was a point on the road that had to be taken into consideration. So, having looked at those points of where things were and where are we headed? We've navigated some curves, climbed some hills, and it brings me to considerations about the road ahead. Where are we headed? What lies ahead for midwives and for midwifery, particularly in the context of today? There's no question that the healthcare system is facing large-scale problems along with multiple views about the reasons and controversies about the potential solutions. And midwives are not unique in finding the current situation challenging. They confront the same problems as other health professions around increased demands, expectations, workloads, concerns about recognition and fair compensation. These pressures undoubtedly contribute to burnout, attrition, and a sense really of competing among professions with each other for public attention, for government attention, and probably government funding. It's distinctly a time of unease. It's a tough road to be on right now. So what are the ways to prepare midwives for the stresses to be faced within the present and future healthcare environment? One of the things in the past that has been fairly common in midwifery programs is for students to have clinical placements with other providers, to learn about others' roles and responsibilities as a way of promoting better relationships. But that learning is context specific and really very individual, and not successful, in my view, in producing any kind of system effects. So a question is, what's to be done differently? Should there be more attention to understanding Canada's large and complex healthcare system? What are those big picture social, demographic, and economic pressures that impact the structure and the function of this large publicly funded healthcare system? Where are policies made and by whom? Who is at the table of influence? Tables of influence, there are many. How and where are those skills developed to be successful participants? I think this is challenging work for midwives because, relatively speaking, the profession is still small. 30 years in one view could be seen as a long time, but on the scale of this large system, it's really a relatively brief period in a system where there's many vested interests. I don't know the best time or the ways to integrate a greater understanding of the big picture into midwifery programs, but I think the need is only growing for graduates to have perhaps a better sense of the overall system in which they are going to face many challenges. But that's not all meant to be doom and gloom. Despite all of the challenges that are out there are really nice examples that midwives are seen as credible and influential participants in health policy work. Example number one, CAM is sought by Canadian government agencies because of their systems approach to developing leaders and their effectiveness within and outside Canada. That's a reputation I learned of outside Canada, that Canadian midwifery, to borrow a quote, punches above its weight in its ability to work collaboratively to build midwifery to reach goals, both within and outside the country itself. The other example, of course, is the establishment of midwifery research centers. MMRC and UBC both have research units, and opening of the graduate program. These are resources for developing leaders and knowledge builders who I hope will expand opportunities, who will work together as they help each other reach new heights and new insights. I think one of the prime examples of how these new efforts will help is taking on newer roles and models of care, expanding the scope of practice, and having the research to support doing that and measuring the impact of those changes. Midwives increasingly are seen as credible providers of sexual and reproductive health care across the reproductive life course, and it's an obvious area of study and evaluation, and I hope it comes to fruition. So those are brief examples of actions to move forward. It is and will be a journey with unknowns. There may be smooth curves in the road. There may also be detours and bumps at other times. The bottom line for me is to keep moving. The healthcare system needs midwives. I think it needs models of care rooted in social justice that respect and value individual needs, that build relationships and that have excellent outcomes for childbearing families. It needs leaders, teachers, practitioners who are knowledgeable, analytic, and constructive, who are part of creating a better healthcare future. Your job is complex, that of helping and leading to create the road that will lead to, I hope, a better where. My task is easier. I get to be at the side of the road, cheering you on. Thank you so much for this invitation and for being here today.
Thank you, Karyn. That is so fantastic. I think a great way to set the scene for our time together this week, and lots of questions for us to reflect on. I want to say we have about 5 minutes for question and answer. So people can type questions in the Q&A box, and I can kind of field those for Karyn, or you are also welcome to raise your hand, and we might have time for a few kind of questions where you ask them directly to Karyn. Also, if you've joined us recently, we have a Padlet, a kind of secondary site where you can go and place comments and things like that. So please go and share your thoughts and discussion over there. But there is one question in the Q&A box, Karyn. Somebody has asked, the EMCMs have been accused of stealing midwives and funding from practices. How do we create a future where midwives have many different models to work in without cannibalizing our traditional model? You know, a simple question to get you started.
Yeah, simple question indeed. Well, again, that's part of that whole negotiation process, isn't it? And I think that the midwives themselves have to be clear about what the end goal is. And then who are the influencers that you can sit with? Where do you go to, in fact, leverage the kind of input that's necessary to have those discussions in a fruitful way, and not to cannibalize, but in fact to complement and to work together to do that. Is it easy? Of course it's not. And it's not simple because the funding structures themselves are not simple. And it's one of the difficulties, in fact, that I learned within governments. The organization makes it often difficult to know where to start, and certainly then where to branch out to, because the funding flows in different places from different pockets. So that's not really an answer, but just to say it's complicated and you need expert policy advisors to help guide that pathway.
Yeah, that's great. I think those are some really helpful insights. Another question in the Q&A box is, what do you see as the key levers to increasing scope of practice for midwives?
I think the key levers are to see that some of it begins to happen, and it already is, sorry, but the evaluation, I think, is critical, so that it's done with good data, it's done with good outcomes, and you, again, don't forget to mobilize the public opinion. It's a powerful force, and I think we may have forgotten over the 30 years that mobilizing the views of the public at large, as well as certainly the consumers of service. It's not a phrase I ever like. It sounds like you're buying something. But the participants in service who are satisfied with care, who know what it means to have care from midwives, will be powerful allies in realizing that expanded scope.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Karyn. One more question from the Q&A box. Claire says, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering how you see the Canadian midwifery regulators as advocates for advancing midwifery across Canada.
Well, the regulatory framework, as we know, is a powerful, it sets limits, it also offers opportunities. So as it deals with the ability to, I think, increasingly make it possible for midwives to be independently, as they have done in terms of authorizing the ordering of certain things and not always having to make referrals, you know, those kind of very practical things that regulators are able to do, they can also then be a partner in moving forward with a changing scope of practice. So if it needs government, it's not fundamentally, I think, a change in the legislation, although it may add to it. But I think that they have to be allies in doing that. And to move in concert would be also important.
That's great. Lots of lessons about allies and seeking those out as we, continue to make that journey across the windy and never certain road ahead of us. Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And as I said, a really wonderful way to start the symposium. And I'm really grateful that you did take that deep breath and decided to say yes when I asked you to do this. So